Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us for our 2022 Owning Rent-Controlled Property in Santa Monica seminar. As many of you know, we put on several seminars during the year. We have one for tenants later on this week, also an introduction to rent control. And then we do a workshop with the city attorney's office in the fall, called the Landlord Tenant Forum. And then we also do a maintenance of rent controlled property with the Code Enforcement Division of the city also in the fall. And you can always sign up for our seminars on our website and go to the seminars page, and we'll have a sign up for you there as we get closer to those events. So if we go to the next slide. So my name is Dan Costello, and I'm the Public Information Manager for Rent Control. And co-presenting with me today is Micah Michalski. Micah is an information coordinator here. Micah is one of the people who typically answer your phone calls if you call us or if you email us or even come in to City Hall. He's one of the people who will meet with you. And we have a lot of information to present today, so we're going to get right into it. If we go to the next slide. So our topic today is going to be, first, an introduction of our new Civics web portal. This is something that's been a couple of years in coming, but we're finally launching, and we're very excited about this. And I think that many of our attendees are interested in seeing this, so we're gonna do that first. I think some of you are seasoned property owners and managers, so you may understand the rent control law already, but for anybody who's new or anybody wants a refresher, we will then continue with an overview of rent control and some of the registration requirements that owners or property managers need to do. We'll talk about the maximum lawful rent, what you can actually charge tenants under rent control. We'll go into some of the administrative remedies that are available both to tenants and to landlords as petitions and complaints. And we'll give you an outline of what the eviction protections are and what your rights and responsibilities are with regard to eviction, inclusive of update on the eviction moratoria related to the COVID-19 crisis. And then finally, we'll end with a section on limitations on the change of use of rent-controlled properties. We go to the next slide. So yeah, so since this is a virtual forum, we don't have the opportunity for the regular Q&A that we do, but you can post your questions to us in the moderator chat. On the right-hand side of your screen, you should see an icon with 3 little people, and you click on that, and then you can type your chat in, or your message, your question into the chat box. And we will stop periodically through the presentation to address your questions. So go ahead and if something comes up, go ahead and put in your questions, and we'll get to them. One thing that I did want to mention before we get started is that there are a lot of things that affect the landlord-tenant relationship that are not covered by the rent control law, and we're going to be sticking with what's in rent control and services that we offer. So we won't be covering things like the return of the security deposit, landlord entry to the unit, eviction procedures. We will talk about what limitations there are for eviction. Noticing, whether that's for entry or for rent increases. As you know, we are approaching the summer season when you will be giving notices to tenants for possible increases in September. So we'll talk a little bit about the notice of change in terms of tenancy, but how that's served and that sort of thing, that's a state law issue, and we won't be talking about that. You can always refer to the California Tenants Guide for landlords and tenants. That is on our website under the More Information tab, and then Information by Subject. We also won't be covering some things that are in the municipal code, like tenant harassment, which is administered by the city attorney's office, permanent temporary relocation, building code violations, the smoke-free residential ordinance, and we'll touch briefly on minimum lease terms, but people should understand that these are ordinances in the municipal code and not really part of rent control. We're familiar with them, but if you were to call us about these issues, we're probably going to refer you out to the appropriate city department for more information. Okay, so let's get right into it. So in March of 2019, so we started on a major capital improvement program to replace a legacy rent and property tracking database that we had. Probably many of you who've been owners or managers for some time have probably seen our old printout and found that many things were coded. I think a separate garage was coded as a 4 and not as separate garage. So there were a lot of things that made understanding our old database not convenient. And it also just wasn't really a kind of modern, efficient solution. And so we have been developing this civics program for about 2 years. And in mid-January, we transferred data from our old system into this new one. And we began using the back office portion of it to process many of the common forms that we get. So if you filed a tenancy registration form this year, we've probably converted that to one of our new types of forms and processed that in the system. We've done about 1,000 of those already. The system can generate correspondence to you, so it's efficient in that way. And it's also all integrated with our document portal, our document management system. So I think we're kind of closing the loop here. And what's really most exciting for us and for you, I think, is that there is a public facing portal to this application. And we do call that Civics. And it really creates a whole new channel for you as owners and managers to interact with us and to file forms with us. You can submit a variety of forms, tenancy registration forms, ownership changes, changes of mailing address, agent authorizations, a number of petitions, and exemption applications. So we really think this is a dramatic leap forward, and we think it will be transformational, and we really are excited to present this to you. So Civics is the third part of what we've been calling Rent 2020, which was an attempt to provide more information to you transparently. The Rent 2020 system includes something called Look Up a Rent, and that's a feature on our website where you can go in and type in an address, and it will return what the maximum allowable rent is for each one of the units on that property, tell you what the tenancy date was that the rent is based on, if it was after January 1st of 1999, and the size of the unit. I will admit, though, that we have to do some upgrades to these systems. The rent Look Up a Rent system right now has to be reconfigured with our new Civics application. And so we are currently only displaying tenancies registered up through, I think, January 31st of this year. We hope to have it showing everything very soon. But we're still working on that. And also our document portal, which is the other part of Rent 2020, which allows you to look up all of our scanned documents on a property going back to 2005. The one difference now, and one thing that we're correcting, is that in the past we've always used, for example, 10 Street for 10th Street, and when you searched for it, you had to type in 10 and ST. That will still work for documents that were filed in the past. For documents that are filed in the new system, we have switched to the ordinal of 10th Street, and you would need to search separately for those in order to find the documents that are under 10th Street. But we'll soon be integrating those, so no matter what you search for, you'll find what you're looking for. So let me just go right into our new web-based solution for filing documents in Civics. So I'm going to give you a demonstration now, just which what we're sharing with you. All right, so you should be seeing a Google screen, and the first thing to know, the website for Civics is simple to remember. It's rentcontrol.santamonica.gov. So this will take you to our Civics login page. Here as it loads. Sometimes there's a delay in what we're displaying too, so hopefully you should be seeing the login page now. And to get started, at the bottom, you'll find that there's a Create a Profile link. And when you click on that link, it takes you to a form to tell us a little bit about you as the user. And so you're going to set up your user profile here. The first question is whether or not you're a tenant, a property owner, or manager. I'll say I'm a property owner. You can set up the account for just yourself, or if you have a management company and you want multiple people to use the account, you can set it up as a company. I'm going to do mine as an individual. The email address that you provide will be your login email. And if you are going to set it up as a company, you want to make sure that everybody would have access to the email that you're going to provide to us. And my name is Dan. Hello. If you are setting up as a company, please give us the business name, and then I'll put in my own address. And telephone number, and then next. So there's just 2 pages to the screen. The second page is really just for property owners and managers. And because Civics is customized to you as a user, we need to know which property addresses you own or manage. And that allows us to configure your account so that when you log in, you will get information that is custom to you. So we put several fields here for individual property addresses. We get down to field number 27 here, and if you own or manage more than 14 properties, then we'll have you just enter the remaining addresses in this field separated by a semicolon, and then we'll go through and set them up. Once you do that, you just hit submit, and you'll get a response that we received your profile form. This does not set up your Civics application yet, though. So because we have to do that configuration in the back end and connect you with the properties that you own, it takes us a little bit of time to go through and make sure that we have the right contact in the system associated with the right property. Once we do that, we'll send you an email with login information and a temporary password. And then you'll just go back to rent control at rentcontrol.santamonica.gov. And then you can log in to your account here. So I'm already a user, so I'll type in my information. And you can, whoops, you do, by the way, forget your password. When you set it up, you'll be able to answer a security question and be able to recover your account. You can also click the Remember Me button, and it saves you from typing in your email address, but you will need to enter the password each time you come back. You might want to also bookmark rentcontrol.santamonica.gov so that you can always get back into your Civics account. So I'm going to log in here. Now, we explained this in the email that we sent to you when we set up your account or reconfigure your account, that you may not find a lot of information on your dashboard right away. And that is because this system really will be useful going forward. So as you file registration forms or other documents with us, they'll start to appear on your dashboard. As you can see, I have several things that I have filed in the past. If you filed tenancy registration forms this year, so we'll associate those with the properties that you own, and you'll see their status when you log in. But let me show you how you can submit a record on this. So this is your dashboard, and we'll come back to this in a minute, but I want to submit a record using this system. And by the way, well, I mentioned there's also the fees that can be paid, and we'll cycle back to that after I show you how to submit a form. But if you look at the top, you'll see there's a band of tabs, and these are pretty similar across all of the applications that you can file in the system. You choose a record, you record some information, maybe there's an additional information depending on the type of the form. You can review what you've entered, and then finally you'll submit it to us. When you hit submit a record, you'll see that there are a variety of forms that can be filed in the system. Currently, we have 15 forms that can be filed, and they are categorized. First, we have a tenancy registration form at the top because that's the most commonly filed form. Then we have other registration forms that would be filed by property owners or managers. So an added amenity form for like parking or storage added to tenancy after 1199. Authorized agent, if you have a property manager and you'd like them to be able to submit documents with us. Change of mailing address forms, ownership registration, various fee waivers. Some of these are filed by tenants, but like an owner-occupied fee waiver or Section 8 fee waiver or separately sold condominium or separately sold home or single-family dwelling. Fee waiver tier, exemption applications, so an owner-occupied exemption, a single-family dwelling exemption or declaration. And then we have one decrease petition that can be filed either by owners or by tenants. We have configured additional applications in the system, but we are kind of rolling those out in a phased approach. We expect to have those probably later this year. We just want to make sure that our most popularly filed forms are available to you now. So let me just show you how you would do a tenancy registration. So you just click on Tenancy Registration. And you'll notice that now we're on Recording Information, the Recording Information tab. There are instructions for you on how to fill out this form. You can print them if you like, or if you want additional information, you can also go to our website. So if you follow this link to how to register a new tenancy, we have a little bit more detail about what we're looking for on this form. For the most part, though, we try to design the forms to make them as straightforward as possible, and we've simplified some of the forms. We've removed some of the information that we've asked for in the past. Like we asked for the date that the property sold or title was transferred on a tenancy registration form. Well, we've now removed that. And we're trying to use each form for its own discrete purpose. For a tenancy registration form, the first thing we ask is to ask which category of form are you filing? And really these tenancy registration forms should be for tenancies on or after January 1st. And for 99 out of 100 and 999 out of 1,000, this is what you're going to choose. So you say a tenancy date after that, and then you have to let us know what property it is, which unit is it that you're trying to register. So you go to Add Primary Site. And then it gives you a search box, so you could put in an address. We recommend that you enter only the street number and the street name here, and then the unit. Of course, everything's going to be in Santa Monica. We don't really need the postal code to look it up. And these suffixes are things like avenue or boulevard. You may need to if your street name, the street name of the property you have, has two variations. There are a few of those in Santa Monica. But then you just hit the search button, and it will find the site or the unit that you were looking for, and you just click that one to add the site. Now you'll see that it's been added here, so you can confirm, okay, that is the unit that I wanted to register. You want to make sure that there's a unit at the end, so we know it's not just the street, but we've got the actual unit. And then this location details is not necessary for this form, so you can just go ahead and click Save and Continue. We've indicated some forms that are required, and those are forms that are marked by a red asterisk. So you may note that if you skip one of these, the system will have you go back and complete that required field. So this one, I know it was Unit A. It's a one-bedroom unit. This property owner and property manager information is optional. It's not essential to registering a tenancy. It can be helpful for us, though, to contact you if there is a question about the form, and you can fill that out if you like to. Then we want to pick the tenancy date. Let's say it began the 1st of this year. And you'll note that there is a time field. You can just click in it. It's not required that you fill it out. And then you're going to give us the initial monthly rent. That's important for registering a tenancy. But I want to point out that many of the fields have a little information icon next to them. And if you hover over that, it will tell you what we're looking for. For example, in this field, it tells you to do not include a registration fee or surcharges. So we just need the pure maximum allowable rent for this unit. Just say it's $2,000. If you charge a registration fee pass through to the tenant at the beginning of the tenancy, you would enter that here. Might be $8.25. Surcharges for older tenancies, you can add some surcharges to the tenancy, into the rent, but for anything after March 1st of 2018, you may not. So we kind of warn you with that information here. And then we'll look for the total amount of rent collected, which would be the sum of the initial monthly rent and a registration fee or surcharge. And then we do have this question here, which is required. For most all of you, it's going to be a standard tenancy registration. it is possible to register some other tenancies, like the first tenancy following an eviction for owner occupancy or something like that. But in, again, 99 out of 100 cases, you're going to be choosing standard tenancy registration. Then you see we have another section called additional information, and this is really about parking and prior tenant. So here we just have a required question: does the tenant have parking? And if you say yes, then you should complete this parking grid. So you want to tell us what type of parking the tenant has, and you do that by clicking the plus arrow. And then it gives you some choices. Is it covered, non-covered, separate garage? We'll say it's a separate garage, and it's for one car. And then you just save and close that. We would like to know the prior tenancy information. Maybe that person left April 1st, and the reason was a tenant vacated voluntarily. Then we get to a certification of information section. This is the end of the form, and it's common to all of our forms, and this replaces your wet signature. So we no longer need for you to send in paper, with your original signature on it. We have been accepting tenancy registration forms online for a few years, but now we can accept many more form types, and all of them kind of require this certification of information. And basically, you're saying that the information is true. Note: for tenancies after July 31st of 2017, you must always give the tenant the rent control information sheet. And by checking this box, you'll save yourself some trouble. We won't come after you and ask you to file a declaration about that. But it is required that you do give that information sheet to the tenant. Then you enter your name and the date. I'll give you a hint: if you press T, that always does today's date and saves you a little time. And then you declare under penalty of perjury that everything is true, just by selecting yes. Then you hit save and continue, and this form is done. If you wanted to, you could add attachments to a form, like if you wanted to add a lease or something. It's not required for a tenancy registration form, but for other types of forms, like owner occupancy exemption application, we do require certain documentation, and this gives you an easy way to provide that to us. You can just you just navigate to your files, and you can upload something here. I'll just skip over that, but go back. So I don't need to do anything here. I'm just going to save and continue this page. And now we're on to review. And you can just scroll through and make sure that the information that you provided is correct. And finally, at the end, you'll submit. I'm not actually going to do this because it's our live system. But once you submit it to us, on a tenancy registration form, you actually have 1 hour to make any changes that you realize afterward, like, oh, actually I didn't do the right type of parking, or I entered the wrong rent. So the form remains open for 1 hour, and you can go back in and make any changes. After an hour, the form is locked, and if you have any changes that you need to be made, or that need to be made, just contact us, and then we can reopen the form for you. You can make any changes you like, but then you will need to re-complete the certification of information, because now you've made some changes that you need to say are true and correct. I went through and explained this kind of step by step, but when you're familiar with the system, it's actually very quick to file a tenancy registration form. And I didn't mention, but one of the nice features of this system is that it is mobile friendly. So literally, you could be out at a property, and if you signed a lease with somebody, you could take a minute right there and open rentcontrol.santamonica.gov on your phone, log in, and you can file the form right on your phone. So it's we think that's going to be a good convenience for you. The form design reconfigures depending on which type of mobile device you're on. So that's also convenient. So now I'm going to show you, once that I've entered a form, I'm going to go back to my dashboard and I can just back up. So at the top, you see I have my dashboard here. So I'm going to click on that, and that's the typically the default view you'll get when you log in. I started to mention that when you log into your account, one of the first things you'll see is whether or not there are any fees due. Rent control charges a registration fee for each controlled unit. We typically bill you at the end of June, and the fees have to be paid by August 1st. And I'll come back and show you how you can actually pay the fees right through this system as well. So looking at my projects, I see the many different types of forms that I have filed, tenancy registration form, and I also see the status. There are various statuses in the system. These are all open, and you can see I never actually completed filing this form. But I do have some others where I am an applicant on a record. So I can look at anything that I've filed. You can scroll through this list if you like, but for somebody who owns a lot of properties, or you file a lot of forms with us, or you're a property management company, you may manage several different properties, and we have a convenient way for you to search for forms relative to that property. So at the top, you can go to look up a record. And I'll point out that we do have this map feature. It has not been configured yet. That will probably be phase 2. I'm not quite sure when we'll get to that, but there was a way to pick a property by using the map. Frankly, it's usually much easier just to type in an address. So I'm going to look at kind of all the records that I have. I don't need to put in my name. I'm the only account holder on this account. But I'm going to put in a street number and the street name. Keep in mind that the suffixes are a different field. So you just scroll and pick the one that's appropriate. I don't need to put in Santa Monica, the parcel number. But I am looking for, these are all the different forms that we have configured for the system. Again, some have been released, some have not. Some are maybe just internal at this point. But I'd like to look for a tenancy registration form. And I can add in the dates that I filed it if that helps me search for something. I'm going to say, well, everything, filed this year. Search. And now it's brought up all of the tenancy registration forms that I have filed only for 323 Marines. And if you want to look at the form, you can hit form details. Now, when you submit a form to us, it doesn't automatically update our database. We do step through a workflow to check things, make sure that what you have registered makes sense. It's the most current tenancy or something like that. So It does take, depends on how many forms we have at a time to process the form and get it so that it's in a completed status. And this, so now that I've searched for it, you'll see that this is integrated with our document management system also. So the form that I'm looking at here was actually filed on paper, and then we scanned it into the system. And those, I can click on the actual document that was filed. Oh, I didn't want to save that, sorry. You really just need to click on the icon itself. Okay. Some of the hesitancy you see here, we are aware of and we're working on, so we're going to try to optimize the servers so that we have the best speed. That may take some time too as we work to. I'm going to pick one of these. Just saving. These do open. Sorry, I'm not getting them to open. I don't want to download them either. Well, I'll do it just to show you. But you can download a document, and then it's probably not going to share. But this is a way that you can keep your files in the way that you want to, but know that everything exists, here in Civics, and you can search for it. So let me go back to, we're getting in here. There, that's why. But let me go back to my dashboard and I'll show you one last thing. And that is how you can pay fees. So as I said, we're about to send out our annual registration fee bills at the end of June. And when we do that, you will see a fees box populated here. And I can go to my fees. And it gives me the breakdown. What did that $1,127.41 come from? Where did it come from? And we see it's an annual bill, and we see that there was a penalty applied for non-payment. But you can select them all, and then go to make a payment. Again, all within your Civics dashboard. And it's going to take you to an outside page for processing. And this, if you've ever paid online, is very similar to what we have on our website. So you'd click on the certified logo. And then you can choose how you would like to make the payment. If you pay by credit card, there is a 2.5% service fee. And you'll see that appear here, the convenience fee. Sorry. But if you pay by e-check, there's just a 35-cent fee, which is less than the cost of a stamp. So we don't know why anybody would not want to file or pay their fees online. It's so much easier, and you'll get a confirmation that it was sent, and there's no question about it getting lost in the mail or anything like that, or we need to have those by August 1st, so you want to make sure you do it timely. And you can pay, however you want, checking, savings, you enter your information here, digital signature, just by typing that in, your basic information, and then you go to next, and then you'll be able to make your payment. So I didn't enter any information, so I'm getting all these error messages. But it's that easy. And then when you return to your dashboard, you'll see that you have a zero balance. When I think that's once we confirm that the funds were available and we're able to transfer them in. So with that, I'll go to, if you have any questions about Civics, again, if you just go to rent control civics.santamonica.gov. You can create a profile. It'll take you to that form, and then we'll get back with you with login information. And then as you start filing forms, you'll find more and more on your dashboard. And we hope that'll be a great convenience for you. I think there are some attendees here who quite some time ago provided us the property information and the email that they would like to use for an account. We still have that information, and if you'd like to contact me and make sure that we set up your account, please do so. We are, because we have just launched this last week, we have over 100 requests, and we're moving through those as quickly as we can. And I'm hoping that generally we'll be able to configure the accounts, within about a week. And we'll probably be much faster about that in the future. So, does anybody have any questions? I'm gonna look at what's been typed in the chat, and I don't see any. Let's see. Don't see any questions so far. If you do have a question, go ahead and type it into the chat. If not, we'll move on. Doesn't look like there are any questions. So I hope you'll all be Civics users soon. We put a lot of effort into this system, and we think it's a great benefit for landlords and property managers. The more you use it, the better it is for us also, because there's a lot of efficiency. There's not going to be any data entry errors, or shouldn't be. Please sign up. We look forward to working with you through Civics. All right, I'll turn this back over to Micah to continue the rest of the presentation.
All right, thank you, Dan. So I'm going to jump into an introduction to rent control. So with rent control, all rent increases during the tenancy are controlled. We do have remedies that are available to provided for situations where excess rent is charged or maintenance is neglected. There are eviction protections. The reasons a tenancy may be terminated are pretty limited. Changes of use and physical removal or conversion of controlled rental units is also restricted. So these are the four legs of the rent control law that it's made up of. The chair of rent control is not very stable if you remove any of them, so that's why all four of these exist. So what units are subject to rent control in Santa Monica? Well, there are approximately 27,500 units spread across 3,500 properties in Santa Monica that are subject to rent control. That includes some units that are occupied by Section 8 tenants. Most residential rental units in Santa Monica that were constructed prior to April 10th of 1979, when the rent control law was passed, are what we're dealing with, what are subject to rent control. The primary exceptions, and this is due to the Costa-Hawkins law that was passed, the primary exceptions are most single-family homes that were not used for residential rental in 1984. That's a 1815 declaration that's available. And any single-family homes that were occupied for at least 2 years can be made exempt by application. Most owner-occupied units or properties with 3 or fewer units can also be made exempt. And separately sold condominiums with tenancies that began after January 1st, 1996. That was the Costa-Hawkins law. Sorry about the order there. May have decontrolled rents, but eviction protections continue with those properties. The look up a rent feature on our website that Dan talked about a little bit, that is a good way to check with us to see if a unit is subject to the rent control law, or if you have any questions about it, definitely give us a call and we can walk you through that over the phone. What is that three or fewer unit owner occupancy exemption? Well, there must be 3 or fewer units on the property. The owner living on the property must continuously own at least 50% interest in the property as a natural person. The owner must live continuously in one of the units as their principal place of residence for at least 120 days before applying. And then this exemption lapses if the property is no longer the owner's principal place of residence, the owner no longer owns at least 50% in the property as the natural person, and exemptions do not transfer automatically to new owners. A new owner would have to meet that same requirement of living there for 120 days before applying, and they would be able to then apply for that new exemption. Registration requirements. Things that are required to own to register with our office, and this is going to be one of the useful features of civics that Dan was just talking about. Ownership registration, whenever there's a change in the title, how title is held, needs to be registered. Any agent authorizations, we need to know who is authorized to file forms on your behalf for your property. Registration of new tenancies and new amenities must be registered with us. That was the number one form filed on our website, and then it's going to be the number one form filed through civics. Anytime you're adding amenities, so for post-99 tenants, if you're adding parking, storage, or a pet, that must be registered with us, and then that'll get rolled into the MAR. And then registration must be done within 30 days. So if you take ownership of a property, you must register within 30 days. Any of these changes really need to happen, the registration needs to happen within 30 days. If you fail to register, the right to implement an increase may be restricted. A rent increase to a tenant while registration is not proper may result in the collection of excess rent. And until registration is proper, the owner will continue to be out of compliance with the rent control law and may be continuing to collect that excess rent. Rent withholding can be ordered until registration is proper. So how do I register a new tenancy? Going back to that civics website that we're so excited about, that's launching, it's going live now, and you'll be able to use permanently starting, or not permanently, but everybody should be able to use it starting June 1st. That's that rentcontrol.santamonica.gov webpage. Apologize for going fast. I just want to make sure that we get to touch on everything. One of the things we're going to briefly talk about, it's outside of the scope of the rent control law, but the city has passed that minimum 1-year lease term. Just a couple things to know about it. It requires rental housing units to be rented to tenants who will use and occupy the unit as their primary residence. The initial lease term needs to be no less than 1 year. These are to be leased unfurnished and only leased to natural persons, so no businesses, corporations, LLCs, things like that. There is a requirement that owners collect documentation from tenants so that if they are questioned on, who they rented to and if it meets this standard, that the owner would need to provide that information. The part of how rent control does apply here is that the intent of the rent control law is that rent controlled units should be used for permanent housing for tenants. It should not be a secondary residence or anything like that. It's meant to be a primary residence. Those separate agreements, one of those things that must be, one of those things for pre-1999 tenancies. This is a way to add amenities to those tenancies that began before January 1st of 1999. These separate agreements must be negotiated separate from the rental agreement, must contain terms comparable to those of similar arrangements in the unregulated market. So if you're offering a tenant parking, it wouldn't be reasonable to offer them parking at an exorbitant amount. You need to figure out about what a fair market value rate for a parking space would be, and that's what should be offered and agreed to. The continued existence of the agreement is not a condition for the tenancy. So if the tenant decided they no longer wanted the parking, could no longer afford the parking, they could terminate that part of the agreement and not terminate their tenancy. breach or termination of this agreement is not grounds for eviction. So agreements for post-99 tenancies, we only allow the additional amenity and additional monthly charge for the addition of parking, storage, or the right to have a pet. Parking could include a garage. And these must be registered with us, and they become base amenities to the unit. And that amount that you agree to, same thing where it must be comparable to lawful arrangements in the unregulated market, must be an arm's length negotiation. There can't be pressure to force the tenant to accept the amenity. That amount, once it's registered with the board, will be rolled into the MAR, and it will be subject to the general adjustment when that happens each year. Are there any questions so far? I know I'm kind of zipping through this because of time, but Dan, do you see any questions coming across?
We do have a question regarding, it really has to do with the minimum 1-year lease term, which I know you're going to cover later, so we'll address this question later. I did want to point out, though, that you can use Civics now to file tenancy registration forms. Effective June 1st, we are no longer going to be accepting them through our other online system called Seamless. So if you attempt to file one June 1st or after, you're going to be redirected to our website or to Civics to file the form there. But other than that, I don't see any other questions. Do you want to go ahead?
All righty. So now we're going to talk about the maximum lawful rent. What is that? Well, the maximum lawful rent is made up of 3 parts. It's the maximum allowable rent, which is the MAR that you're all familiar with, the addition of any registration pass-through fees, and allowable surcharges. So those 3 things combined make up your maximum lawful rent. The MAR is that base rent. That's what you initially registered, or if the tenancy began before 1999, it's likely the first rent that was charged for the unit that was charged in April 10th of 1978, plus the general adjustments that have happened through the years. Otherwise, for those tenants that are market rate that moved in after 99, those are going to be what was first registered when that tenant moved in, plus any general adjustments that have happened in that time. And that just explains what I just said. The pre-99 tenants rent is usually based on what was in effect in April 10th of 1978. That was 1 year before the rent control law passed. So that was what was used as that snapshot in time for what the rent was. And then for post-99 tenancies, usually based on that initial registered rent, beginning of the tenancy. So what determines the amount of the annual general adjustment? Well, it's 75% of the annual change in the Regional Consumer Pricing Index, the CPI. The board does retain authority to apply a maximum dollar amount based on a formula in the charter, and the GA is limited to fall between 0% and 6% to reduce the impacts of deflation or hyperinflation. This year, the GA will be 6%, and the board at its June 9th meeting will be discussing a possible cap based on that formula that would come out to $140 per month for tenants. And again, that's the June 9th meeting will be the public hearing on that. The GA can be taken each year no earlier than September 1st. So that's when it would first go into effect. As long as all registration fees and penalties have been paid, the tenancies are properly registered on the property. The rent control information sheet for those tenants that moved in after July 31st of 2017 has been given to them. There are no uncorrected citations or notices of violation of health, safety, housing laws for the unit or property. The landlord is substantially in compliance with the rent control law. The owner gives proper written notice. One of those things Dan mentioned that falls under state law, but proper written notice is required, and the tenancy has been in effect for at least 12 months. So that for the unit to be eligible for this general adjustment, it has to be the 2nd September 1st that the tenant is in the property. So if it's 12 months and then that September 1st. And how can I learn the MAR for a unit? Each June, we send out a MAR report to each of the property owners. So it's one of those things that really it's important to make sure that your mailing address is up to date with us and properly registered with us, and that we know to send it to the owner, to the authorized agent, who you want to receive this report. The other option is going to be using the look up a rent feature on our website. And you can always call or email us, and we can look up that information for you as well. One thing that's important to note is you really want to make sure that you're checking the tenancy dates for accuracy. If somebody has moved in since and they're paying more or less than the previous tenant, you want to make sure that date is accurate so that we know, and that you know, that what you've registered and any general adjustments that have been applied to it have also been accurate. So the registration fee is the annual fee for controlled units, and it's charged to property owners by the Rent Control Board unless a fee waiver for a particular unit has been granted. Currently, the fee is $198 per unit per year, and as long as the owner paid that annual fee on time, which is usually August 1st, 50% of the registration fee may be passed through to each tenant by including an additional $8.25 per month in the tenant's rent. There are some registration fee waivers that are available. Low-income elderly and low-income disabled tenants may apply for registration fee waiver for their unit. Owners may apply for registration fee waiver for units that are occupied by Section 8 tenants. Owners holding at least 25% interest in the property, occupying a unit as their principal place of residence, may also get a fee waiver. If a fee waiver is approved, the registration fees are not charged for the unit, so that $198 is saved, and therefore you cannot pass through half of that fee to the tenant because you're not being charged any of it. The allowable surcharges. So this is the portion of the property tax bill. This is things that were voted in deadness, so things that were voted for by the residents of the city of Santa Monica. To be assessed as a tax. These can be passed through on a limited basis to tenants that started before March 1st of 2018, unless the building was sold or reassessed after March 1st of 2018, then no pass-throughs are allowed at all. If a new owner takes possession of the building, they should stop charging those pass-throughs as part of the rent. The surcharges for existing tenancies are capped at 4% of the MAR or $35, whichever is less. And the surcharges, I already said that part about can't be passed through if the new tenancies began after March 1st of 2018. So a copy of the property tax bill is required to be given to the tenants if you are passing through any of those surcharges. The only exception would be the Santa Monica Malibu Unified School District Measure R surcharge, because that is the same for everyone, no matter how many units are on the property. Each unit is assessed the same amount, or each property is assessed the same amount, and then it's divided by the number of units. Sorry. But any of the other items that are highlighted here, this is an older bill, but the highlighting should be the same. These each can be passed through by using that worksheet on the notice of change in terms of tenancy, the notice of rent increase, which is coming up on the next slide here. So the specific costs from each costs from the property tax bill are listed on the notice of change in terms of tenancy form, also labeled 5A through 5E, prepared by the Rent Control Agency for use by owners in giving tenants notice of their rent increase. So that's that worksheet here. And as you can see, when you're filling out that notice of change in terms of tenancy, each of these items corresponds with a different box on the form. So on your MAR report, you'll get the current MAR of each property. That's going to go, that corresponds with a different line on, with a line on each of the forms. The general adjustment has a spot, and then you'll know if it's supposed to be a percentage or a dollar amount that'll be listed on your MAR report. And then the new MAR is there. We've done the math for you as well. And then you're able to, there's a line for the rent control pass-through fee and lines for each of the items on the property tax bill. We also do have a separate seminar presentation on our website that goes into detail on filling out the notice of change in terms of tenancy. If you have any questions on that, take a look at that seminar. Also, we're happy to try to walk you through this over the phone, or if you want to make an appointment to come into the office, we can go over some of your forms. We can't fill the forms out for you, but we can help show you which items go in which places to make it easier for you to fill out forms. The school district partial tax exemption is available for property owners who meet the following qualifications. If you are 65 and older by June 30th of the year in which you apply, you occupy the property as your primary residence. Applications are available by contacting Santa Monica Malibu Unified School District. That number is 310-450-8338 and extension 70263. When this waiver is granted, no school district parcel tax is charged for the property, for the whole parcel, and no school district parcel tax surcharge may be passed through to any tenants on the property. So you need to make sure you're removing that line if you have that exemption. All right, and then there's the Clean Beaches and Ocean Parcel Tax exemption. This exemption is available for low-income property owners who qualify and apply. If granted, then no tax will be charged and no surcharge may be included in the rent. Currently, the person who runs this exemption through the Watershed Program Manager, Curtis Castle, and he can be reached at curtis.castle@santamonica.gov. This is for property owners to apply for this. There is also an application for individual low-income seniors or disabled tenants to apply for an individual waiver just for their unit as well. And we have that application available in the rent control office. Are there any questions up to this point? Any questions about the MAR or the maximum lawful rent?
All right, I'm not seeing any questions related to what you just presented. Again, for anyone who joined us late, you should find a chat icon on the right side of your screen, and you can submit questions to us that way. I'll just add to what Micah told you. So because the board has not yet decided whether or not there will be a cap, we haven't, we're presenting information from last year. Once we get the final word on what the GA will be, then we'll revise our forms and provide them all to you. The summer mailing is expected to go out, I think, the last week of June, or it should arrive for you the last week of June. And a registration fee bill will be sent separately. But if you have any questions when you get your MAR report, as Micah said, we will have we do have a video up from last year about how you complete that notice of change in terms of tenancy, and we'll update that for this year to help you fill out those forms. Again, it does require that we have the right information from you regarding the tenancies, so please do make sure that all of your tenancies have been registered with us so that you'll get a clean and accurate MAR report that you can use. But that's it. I still see no questions. Let's see. Um, we do have one. It's not kind of related to what you have just presented. I'll address it briefly, but it is regarding water usage by tenants, and is there any way to control that? We at Rent Control do not control that. However, we just sent out our spring newsletter, and we did include with that a flyer from the city's water department giving tenants specific ways that they can save water. I mean, that's an interest, to our whole community. So that's what we sent out. It's in English and Spanish. It's really a communications, campaign and get people to understand that, we're in a drought, and obviously, water is a cost to many owners, and it would be a win-win for everybody if people would conserve. So we try to get the message out to people, but there's really no mechanism within the rent control law to control that. So I guess we'll move on then to petitions and complaints.
All right, so this is one of the other legs of the rent control law that exists to provide landlords and tenants both. There are remedies for both to make sure that the landlord is getting a fair return and that the tenant is getting the full value of their rent dollar based on their initial lease agreement. So the first one here that we're going to talk about is complaints for excess rent. Complaints for excess rent may be filed by tenants who believe they are being or have been charged amounts that exceed what is allowed by the rent control law. If a hearing decision determines that excess rent has been collected, tenant will be authorized to withhold rent until the excess rent has been recovered. Interest and penalties can be included in the amount of an award. That's done by a hearing officer, and there'd be a written decision outlining exactly how that withholding should happen. Common examples of excess rent include being charged for an additional occupant, unregistered additional amenities, utility charges, improper noticing of rent increases, or improper pass-through of surcharges. Can tenants be charged separately for utility costs? Where a unit is separately metered and a tenant pays the utility company directly, the tenant could be required to pay utility costs. If a property is master metered and the lease requires a tenant to pay a share of the monthly utility bill, the owner must specify the exact dollar amount at the start of the tenancy. So you are going to have to estimate there exactly what the share of that utility is, and you're going to have to register that as part of the initial monthly rent. And then that would be subject to general adjustments as time goes on, as the tenant remains in the unit. Petitions for rent decrease. Tenants may file a petition for a rent decrease when necessary repairs are neglected or for the reduction or removal of amenities or housing services. If a rent decrease is granted, it will remain in effect until the repairs are made or the amenity or services are restored. Owners who wish to remove a base amenity or housing service may file a decrease petition themselves. So we're seeing this sometimes if a pool is using too much water or the landlord wants to remove a pool, they might file this petition for rent decrease on their own, or if they're removing green space and they're concerned that the tenants are going to think that there's a reduced benefit to their rent being paid, that's something that a landlord might file a rent decrease for. What maintenance is required? In addition to state law and other local laws, rent control regulations provide remedies for failure to make necessary repairs inside units and common areas. These include, but they're not limited to, issues like water supply, water leakage, worn paint, heat, elevators, porches, counters, smoke alarms, screens, insects, appliances, dangerous walkways, broken windows or doors, electrical problems, plumbing problems. Anything that kind of goes into the value of the rental agreement for the tenant, and those things being maintained. Base amenities and housing services are those that were provided on the base rent date, as well as those required by law, and must continue to be maintained and provided. Examples may include parking, refrigerator, smoke alarm, storage, other appliances, the right to have roommates, carpet, window covering, the right to overnight guests, stoves, screens, the right to a pet. And this includes services to common areas such as gardening, laundry, on-site management services, if there's a recreation room, a pool, a gym, things like that. How are the base amenities determined? So those pre-1999 tenancies, the base amenities are determined by what was provided and what housing services were available April 10th of 1978, or if the unit was not rented, the first date it was rented thereafter, so when the unit first came under rent control. For post-January 1st, 1999 tenancies, the date determining the base amenities and housing services is the date the current tenancy began or when the separate agreement was made. So when that first, whatever was provided to the tenant when they first moved in, or if the separate agreement was made, the date of that separate agreement. We have another kind of rent decrease petition called a construction-related decrease. And this may be granted when a unit is rendered uninhabitable due to construction, when construction substantially reduces housing services, or when construction interferes with the tenant's ability to occupy the unit as a resident. No decrease is authorized for unavoidable construction impacts caused by necessary maintenance or repairs unless the construction is carried out in an unreasonable manner or the construction takes an unreasonably long time to complete. Regulation 4400 sets decrease ranges for many possible issues, and decreases are calculated when the problems arose, so when the impacts were first felt by the tenant. This is different from the maintenance-related decrease, which is not necessarily going to be, retroactive to when the impacts were first felt. There's a different timeline for that, for the Regulation 4200 decrease. We do offer mediation services to help landlords and tenants come to an agreement and understanding about the impacts of the construction and try to mitigate the impacts. There are other times when the MAR can be adjusted. We have a petition called a Tenant Not in Occupancy petition, and the owner may file this petition for an increase when the owner believes the tenant does not use their unit as their primary residence. This is something that must be proven at a hearing, and the rent board will grant a one-time market rate increase. Individual rent increase petitions may also be filed. The owner may file a petition for a rent increase based on unusually high expenses, such as capital improvement expenses. These petitions must include all of the units on the property, and they are based on ensuring that the landlord is able to get a fair return, and that's based on the 1978 return on the property adjusted for inflation. So if the costs of operating the property have exceeded the adjusted for inflation amount of what the revenue for the property would have been, that's the time when this kind of a petition can be used, can be successful. So just pulling a little data from our annual report, the effectiveness of mediation petitions. We had 12 excess rent petitions filed in 2021, 61 decrease petitions filed, 16 construction-related decreases filed, and 61% of petitions were mediated and fully or partially resolved. 92% of excess rent complaints were resolved after administrative or formal mediation, and 92% of construction petitions were fully mediated or resolved. Any questions about petitions?
Thank you, Micah. We do have a couple of questions. First, it's really a three-part question. It's what counts as an amenity? You did cover that, so we can maybe just go over that a bit. And there's sort of a specific two-part question. How about a premium dish subscription, or is Wi-Fi or TV considered to be a utility? You want to take that, Mike? Yeah.
Yeah, so the easy way to think about amenities, at least for post-99 tenants, is anything that they would have reasonably had access or use of when they first moved in. So if when they moved in, they had all of their cooking facilities, they had a refrigerator, they were provided Wi-Fi. Those are all things that would reasonably be considered amenities to the unit. And if those were reduced or eliminated, then the tenant would not be getting the full value for their rent dollar, and their rent could be decreased. The amenities for pre-1999 tenants are a little bit more complicated, because they are not based necessarily on when that tenant moved in, but they're based on what was an amenity to the unit when it first came under rent control. And many of those tenants were not there in 1978 when it first came under rent control. So we do have a list of the primary housing services that were provided, and then there needs to be some kind of evidence that if it wasn't included in that list, that it was an amenity to the unit. For the issue of Dan, did I get enough into that, do you think, or do you want to?
Yeah, I think so. I think the best way to think about it is when a tenancy began, it typically began with a certain amount of amenities. Somebody decided to move into a unit because certain things were provided for the rent dollar. And if the owner was providing a premium dish subscription, then of course that's in the calculation for the tenant about how much they should pay for this unit. And if it's taken away, then they're not getting their full rent dollar. And that's really the way we would look at any kind of amenity. If there were, well, we'll go to another question, because I think there's another part of this that I think will help. It's a bit more complicated, but the question is, so a tenant in a 0-bedroom, 300 square foot unit has a tenancy that predates an electrical upgrade that added individual meters to the building. His actual electrical usage for his unit is currently over $400 a month, and the current HUD figures estimate a max allowance of $49 for his unit. Is there any available recourse? Well, I don't know if this is possibly a tenant who's getting a Section 8 or housing choice voucher, but from what you're asking, you're saying that the tenant moved in before there were individual meters for each unit. So that suggests that owner-paid electricity was the base amenity for this tenant when they moved in. It is possible now that the units are individually metered for the landlord to remove that amenity, but the tenant could file a petition for rent decrease because they're no longer getting owner-paid electricity with their rent dollar. The amount that would be decided for that would be decided by a hearing officer. And that's, why we have our hearings, because, each case can be complicated, and we'd have to look at, why, why there's such an unusually high electrical bill, especially for such a small unit. But a hearing officer would have to look at the totality of the situation and decide how much the rent should be reduced for that situation. And that's the same for, like a satellite dish or Wi-Fi. If the owner decided to no longer provide that service under the rent control law, the tenant could file a petition. The owner could file the petition as well to have a determination as to how much the rent should be reduced for that. We'd probably look at what is the value of that Wi-Fi service. But ultimately, it would be up to a hearing officer looking at, the whole situation. And as Micah mentioned, most of the time we're able to resolve these issues in mediation. So we don't have to go to a full hearing. And it is a service that's provided by rent control that you may want to take advantage of, just to have a third party decide, how much the rent should be reduced in exchange for amenities being removed. Let's see what else we have here. An owner asks, utilities are sky high, much more than in the past. What can an owner do? Well, it's challenging because, if utilities are included in the rent for the tenant and the rent is controlled, there's really not an opportunity to pass along these utility costs. One thing to consider, though, is that the general adjustments each year are intended to provide the owner an increase in the rent so that they can keep up with costs. As you know, inflation's been very low in previous years. This year, we're looking at 6% increase based on an 8.5% consumer price index number in March. So, there could be an increase to the rent come September that might help ameliorate the increased cost of utilities. Okay, we have a question here. So with the water shortage, if I reduce watering of the common areas to conserve water, is the tenant entitled to a rent reduction? Well, I'll take this one again. If the tenant felt that there was some diminution in what they were getting for their rent dollar, then they could file the petition with us, and it would be up to a hearing officer to decide. That said, just reducing the water usage, as long as you kind of can still maintain, the basic landscaping or some kind of acceptable landscaping, shouldn't result in a rent decrease. But tenants can certainly file with us. Hearing officers do consider public policy when deciding the amounts for rent decreases. There's, like I said, with the hearing, they really look at the totality of the situation, and it's hard to say. You'd have to look at what did the landscape look like before and after. Is it really unacceptable, or is it kind of okay? There's such a range. It's hard to say, but what we want you to know is basically the process. We can't say in each situation how much the rent would be reduced. I think Micah did mention Regulation 4200, which is in Chapter 4 of our regulations, and that does specify a range of decrease amounts for various conditions. And sometimes that range is pretty great, and it really depends, again, on the severity, also the rent that is paid, a lot of different factors. So that's why we have hearing officers, do that. But you can look at Regulation 4200 to see a range of decrease amounts.
And those
All right.
numbers are also pulled out on the rent decrease petition itself, which might be a little bit easier to navigate to and to read on our website. So that's another option to see what those typical ranges look like.
Right. One of the attendees is also suggesting we need to consider a higher cap on the rent increase. As Mike mentioned, the cap this year, if the board decides to implement it, will be $140. But the question before the board is really to implement that cap or not. The actual amount of the cap is set by law in the rent control charter as approved by the voters. So we simply do the calculation to find what that amount is, but we can't change the amount. That would take a change in the law itself, and that would have to go before the voters of Santa Monica. So currently, the cap is proposed at being $140, and the only question is to implement it or not. Okay, and I think that's all the questions. So if you want to continue, Micah.
All right, we're going to talk a little bit about evictions and how the rent control law affects eviction. The reasons for terminating a tenancy are pretty limited. Termination notices served on tenants for most types of evictions must be filed with the agency and with the city attorney's office. That was due to Measure RR, the warning letters RR. This is separate. Sorry. Evictions for owner occupancy are subject to a number of limitations and requirements, and warning notices are required for some types of eviction. That's the Measure RR. So the eviction limitations, there are 7 fault reasons and 3 no fault reasons that the law allows for eviction. The non-payment of rent, obviously that has been impacted by state legislation and COVID rent relief, but typically that is a just cause for eviction. Violating an important condition of the rental agreement, causing substantial damage or a substantial nuisance, and refusing lawful access to the rental unit. No fault evictions include evictions for owner occupancy, withdrawal of a property from the rental housing business, that'd be the Ellis Act, or if a property is granted a removal permit. The end of a lease is not a just cause for eviction, and even if a line about being able to provide 60-day notice to a tenant to vacate was included in the lease, that's actually not a just cause reason to terminate the tenancy. So you cannot just give a rent control tenant notice to move out and have them move out. So the limitations for evicting for owner occupancy. Ownership must be by a natural person with at least 50% ownership. The owner can evict for a close family member. It doesn't just have to be them living there. Must intend to move in within 30 days of the date the unit is vacated and occupy the residence for at least a year in good faith. Not allowed if a landlord or a relative already occupies a unit on the property, and the rent that is charged for subsequent re-rentals will be restricted. It'll be based on the rent that the tenant that was evicted was paying, plus any changes due to the general adjustment. There are also some other limitations on evicting for owner occupancy. Tenants who have been deemed terminally ill or have lived in their unit for at least 5 years and are over 62 years old or disabled cannot be evicted for owner occupancy unless the evicting owner is also at least 62, disabled, or is terminally ill. Relocation benefits must be paid, must be placed in an escrow account for the tenant who is being evicted. And tenants of Torca condominium conversions who are the participating tenant So generally that's the tenant who was there at the time of the conversion from apartments to condominiums when that was approved, may not be evicted for owner occupancy. There are restrictions on which unit a owner can select to evict for owner occupancy. They cannot evict from a unit if there's a comparable unit on the property that is already vacant. They cannot evict from a unit if there's a comparable unit on a property that has been occupied by the current tenant for a shorter amount of time. So that most recent to move in would be the one that needs to be evicted for owner occupancy if that's what's happening. And then comparable means the same number of bedrooms with square footage that varies by no more than 15%. So those are the things that are considered when selecting a unit. So there are also some additional eviction limitations that exist in the municipal code. Good cause eviction protections have been extended to tenants in multi-unit buildings that are not subject to the rent control law. And the following limitations apply to rent-controlled and non-rent controlled properties. If there's a child that is under 18, or an educator that lives in the unit, a child or educator is a tenant of the unit and has a custodial or family relationship with a tenant in the unit, and the tenant has lived in the unit for 12 months or more. The date the tenant must move out of the unit cannot fall during the school year. Otherwise, they would be protected from eviction. The California COVID-19 Rent Relief Act is still impacting tenants and landlords. Tenants must have completed their application prior to March 31st of this year. And if they are still pending a final decision from the program, state law is providing eviction protections against an unlawful detainer being filed as a result of the non-payment of rent for months that are eligible, months that were eligible for assistance. These state level protections are in place until June 30th of 2022. Of course, like everything else, that is unless extended. And landlords looking to verify an application, they can call the California COVID Rent Relief Call Center, and that number is 833-430-2122. Again, that's to verify an application and eligibility. They should be able to help you with that to determine if a tenant is protected by this act. There are also local and county eviction moratoria that are in place. These are, while the rent relief program is in existence, these do not include protections for non-payment of rent. The LA County order does have, beginning July 1st, after that California order expires, eviction protections for non-payment of rent, including a self-certification to establish an affirmative defense against eviction for households with an income at or below 80% of the area median income. And that's only due to COVID-19 financial hardship that was incurred, so that prevented them from paying rent on or after July 1st of 2022. So any of that back rent is not covered by this program. That is still just covered by the state program. And that county program and county eviction protections currently are listed as extending through the end of the year, so through December 31st of 2022. The local Santa Monica emergency order is currently scheduled to expire June 30th, and this provides residential tenants with protection from evictions for no fault evictions, including owner occupancy, refusing entry into a unit with limited health and safety exceptions. So emergency type situations, they're protected from being evicted for having unauthorized occupants or pets, again with limited health and safety exceptions. Nuisance is not a just cause for eviction, again, with those limited health and safety exceptions. And Ellis evictions are not permitted through the end of June. The notice, my understanding is the notice, the 60-day notice cannot begin until July 1. All right, any questions on evictions? I know there's been a lot of fluidity in the eviction situation over the last couple of years. So something that we may need to refer you out to other agencies or encourage you to get the assistance of an attorney if you need to move forward with eviction proceedings.
Yeah, I just like to repeat the website address for the county because that's I would say another layer of eviction protections here. So that's dcba.lacounty.gov/no evictions. Because, Micah talked about some evictions for owner occupancy. There are more conditions for that under the county's resolutions. So you really kind of need to inform yourself of the multiple levels. The rent control law does allow eviction for owner occupancy, but there are other things in place right now. So you just got to pay attention to all those different moratoria, and hopefully we'll get out of this crisis sooner than later. But I don't see any other questions currently. If anybody's got one regarding what Micah has just presented, the eviction protections under the rent control law, which again are another one of the legs that support our program. And I don't see any other questions.
And I believe we're coming up on our last section here, so we can open it up for more questions after this last section as well.
All right, looks like we can go ahead.
Great, thank you. Now we're talking about limitations on change of use for the property. So property that is under rent control will remain under rent control unless it is removed. There are a couple of ways a property can be removed aside from the temporary use exemption or the owner-occupied exemption for 3 units or less. There are removal permits. There is the Ellis Act. Those are really the only two. And then permanent relocation benefits are required to be paid by the city, or the city requires that permanent relocation benefits be paid for no-fault evictions. Sorry about that. So what is a removal permit? A removal permit may be granted by the board to remove a unit from a rental housing market by demolition, conversion, or other means. If the unit is uninhabitable and it is not economically feasible to make it habitable, when the property is to be redeveloped with replacement rent-controlled units. Removal permits expire if they're not acted upon. You do need an agency such as code enforcement to deem the unit uninhabitable. It's not something that can be just declared on your own in writing. It's something that you need an enforcement agency, a government agency of some sort, code, health department, something like that, to declare in writing that the unit is uninhabitable. So the other option is the Ellis Act. And the Ellis Act is a state law that allows owners to withdraw from the residential housing business and evict tenants. It requires notice of intent to withdraw the property being filed with the board. Notice of termination tenancy must be properly served on the tenants, and relocation benefits must be paid to displaced tenants. Tenancies must initially be terminated 120 days from filing notice of withdrawal, and tenants 62 or older or disabled may request that their tenancies be extended a full year. Withdrawal cannot be completed during a tenant's lease term. Individual condo units also may not be withdrawn. So the Ellis Act is really about multifamily rental properties that and all of the units need to be withdrawn. You can't just pick and choose. Ellis Act restrictions and penalties. If withdrawn units are re-rented within 2 years of a withdrawal, displaced tenants can sue for all damages. They can sue for unlimited damages. Any re-rental within 5 years of the withdrawal must be at the rent-controlled rate that's applicable for the unit. So that's the rate that the tenant was paying when they were evicted, plus any general adjustments. If withdrawn units are demolished and the property is redeveloped and new units are rented within 5 years of withdrawal, all units are subject to rent control. If units are re-rented within 10 years of withdrawal, the owner must first offer units to displaced tenants, or tenants may obtain a judgment against the owner equal to 6 times the monthly rent when withdrawn. Any subsequent use of a withdrawn property requires a reoccupancy permit from the city, from the building and safety. The other option, if you are trying to reclaim a unit or get a tenant out of a unit, is to enter into a voluntary buyout agreement. So this is something that is different from permanent relocation fees because this is a voluntary agreement entered into by both the tenant and the landlord. You're going to attempt a buyout agreement. You must give the tenant a written notice of their rights. We do have a packet that shows that on our website, that shows all the rights and the code sections that you need to provide as far as rent control is concerned. The tenant must know that they have the right not to enter into the buyout agreement. They have the right to consult with an attorney and or with the rent control board before signing, and they have the right to cancel the agreement at any time up to 30 days after signing. We have current data on our website for what recent buyout agreements based either on the city area, so the number of units that were bought out in that area, and the average dollar amount for the buyout unit, for the buyout. And then we also have it broken down, and this is again available on our website, by unit size, how many of those were filed, and the average buyout amount. So this is the amount that was agreed to by the tenant, and the landlord for buying out the unit. One thing that's important to note is if tenants are evicted through no fault of their own, one of these no fault reasons, they are able to get priority on an affordable housing list if they qualify financially for that. However, tenants who accept a buyout offer will not be given priority for affordable housing because this is a voluntary agreement. It's not something that was forced on them. They agreed to it. All right. Are there any other questions that have come up, either about this section or anything else that we've covered today?
Right. There was an additional question probably on the last section, and that was, does a tenant have to submit an application to the county for protection, and will the county provide rent reimbursement to landlords after the state program ends? I don't know if you have a specific answer to that, Micah. I don't believe
I don't yet.
Yeah. My understanding, well, first of all, I would again refer you to the county for the rules on their program. I would imagine that the language says that the tenant will self-declare, that they're under that 80% median family income threshold. So they must do that some, but I don't know the mechanism for that. I have not heard, my understanding is that there is no rent forgiveness. So the tenant would continue to owe the rent. It's just a matter of preventing eviction and giving the tenant a longer amount of time to pay. There are various programs in the work at the county to try to help tenants who are lower income, and they might be directed to those resources. The county does offer a mediation service, and you can get to that at that same website, which is dcba.lacounty.gov, and then /mediation. And they may be able to assist with working out some arrangement between you and your tenant. But for the real details on the program, we'd have to direct you to the source. Anybody else have a question?
And that is typically what we try to do when it's something that's outside of the scope of rent control. We do try to connect you with the source of the information as best we can. We can't speak on behalf of these other agencies, and we wouldn't want to misquote them. So we do often try to just connect you with the right phone number, the right contact information, so that you can get your question answered if we're not able to answer it ourselves.
Right. But we do have all the information coordinators who can answer your questions about rent control and otherwise direct you, as Micah said. So this presentation is being recorded, and we will post it on our seminar page website. So if you want to refer to it, it may take a little bit of time to get it up there. But if you want to refer back to this or invite somebody else to watch it, that'd be great. We did see one question. The question is, where do I get information on placing my own condominium into the rental market? Well, you might want to, first contact us and find out if that condominium is subject to rent control. Separately sold condominiums with tenancies after January 1st of 1996 may qualify for rent decontrol, and there may not need to be, or you may not need to register the tenancy with us. But if it is a controlled unit, then you would want to file one of those tenancy registration forms. But I invite you to just call us at 310-458-8751, number on the screen there, and ask for an information coordinator like Micah, and they can look up the property and give you direction on how to do that. Any other last questions? Not again, I will just encourage all of you to check out rentcontrol.santamonica.gov and look into setting up a civics account for yourself. Right? Thank you all for joining us. The next you'll hear from Rent Control will probably be our summer mailing, which again, you should expect the last week of June, with the full MAR report and the form that you can use to notice tenants of a rent increase this September, and also the registration fee bill, which again, you can pay online very easily with the Civics account. So everybody have a great day, and thanks for joining us. Bye now.